up on NewsHour in the next 30 minutes, the embattled president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, says he won't be in charge once a new constitution is adopted. Is it Russia, though, that's really pushing him out? Also, could a new blood test spot 50 cancers in their very early stages? And how to get the cold water buzz when you can't get in the water. All that's coming up after the news.
BBC News with Julie Candler. Reports from Tehran say a top Iranian nuclear scientist has been assassinated. Press TV, quoting unofficial sources, is reporting that Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was murdered near Tehran. Another semi-official news agency, Fars, says he's being treated in hospital. Iran's nuclear authority has denied there's been any incident involving a nuclear scientist. The Ethiopian Prime Minister has met 3 African Union envoys who are seeking to bring an end to the conflict in Tigray. Abiy Ahmed thanked the AU for its concern about what he described as Ethiopia's efforts to bring a criminal clique to justice. The envoys will not be allowed to travel to Tigray. Belarus's long-term leader Alexander Lukashenko says he will not be president once a new constitution is in place. He said it was better Belarus went through what it needed to go through now without a war. Belarus's opposition wants Mr. Lukashenko to step down immediately and for a process of constitutional change to begin only after free and fair elections are held. Alexei Navalny has urged the EU to impose tough sanctions on Russian oligarchs and President Putin's circle, saying Russia's run by criminals. The Russian opposition leader said European politicians should only recognise the results of next year's parliamentary elections if all candidates could participate. Today's planned commemorations for Tamil Tiger rebels killed in Sri Lanka's civil war have been banned after a 5-year window in which they were allowed. Courts imposed the prohibition on being petitioned by the new hardline Sinhalese national government. South Korea's spy agency says it's foiled attempts by North Korean hackers to intercept South Korean drug makers working on coronavirus vaccines. And the UN Food Agency says a 3-year drought in southern Madagascar has pushed 1.5 million people into crisis. BBC News.
Welcome back to NewsHour. The football legend Diego Maradona was buried last night next to his parents on the outskirts of the Argentinian capital Buenos Aires. He died on Wednesday at the age of 60 from a heart attack. Thousands of people had hoped to pay their final respects as his coffin lay in state in the presidential palace, but many missed out and there were clashes between angry mourners and the police. From Buenos Aires, Katie Watson reports.
The tears didn't stop. All day, mourners filed through the doors of the presidential palace. Vice President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner lingering at his coffin to pay her respects. It's been a hero's farewell for Maradona. Lying in state is an honour afforded to few in Argentina, a mark of just how loved he was here. Argentinians waited for hours, breaking into song to keep the spirits up and to remember the good times.
Football has died, so we have to remember him in the best way. He was one of the best. That goal with the English, we'll never forget that.
I never forget what Maradona did for the humble. When people didn't have enough to eat, he gave the joy when many people suffered. No one should ever forget what Diego did for the humble, for the neighbourhoods and for the people.
Can't be explained just by Argentinians' love of football. Yes, it's important, but it's much more than that. The people who've come here today saw Maradona as a national icon, a man who represented them and did them proud. And it's a legacy that spans generations.
As mourners left the palace, for some, it was too much to process.
It's the only one who actually made all the country proud, no matter what political orientation you have, religious. He came from nowhere and he put our country in the world.
In a country hard hit by coronavirus, otherwise strict rules were being ignored for Argentina's footballing superstar. As the day went on and the summer temperatures rose, emotions also ran high. Hundreds of fans broke down the barriers and riot police responded. Authorities had to stop public viewing of the coffin to keep the peace.
Honestly, I don't know how the family coped, but we can't say goodbye to Diego in just the few hours which was allowed. It was obvious there would be such a mess. They should have given more time for the people because Maradona belongs to the people.
Del cementerio está entrando en este momento hacia el lugar donde los...
Diego Maradona was Argentina's wild child, loved despite his flaws, celebrated beyond measure. Argentina doesn't want to forget.
Y mucha, pero mucha emoción adentro. El momento de la paz para Diego Maradona.
Katie Watson with that report from Buenos Aires. You're listening to NewsHour. You're listening to NewsHour live from the BBC in London. I'm James Menendez. The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has hinted he may be ready to relinquish his post. There have been more than 3 months of protests and unrest against his re-election back in August by a landslide, according to official figures, but widely regarded as rigged. Let's talk to our Moscow correspondent, Sarah Rainsford. Sarah, is this Mr. Lukashenko standing down?
No, I don't think we can go that far at all. It's certainly a hint that he is prepared to suggest that he won't be around for the long term, and that if this constitutional reform goes ahead, then he's saying here at least, is not going to be the president who is then re-elected under this new constitution. But there's quite a few sort of things to mention, sort of caveats to that. This is Alexander Lukashenko. He's famous for saying one thing and doing absolutely the other. And also he has hinted in the past that he wouldn't be around for good. He said he wouldn't cling to power. He said he's talked about a time in the future when he wouldn't be around. So he's conceded that he's not planning on staying on as president of Belarus forever. But he's certainly, I suppose this is perhaps the strongest hint yet, that he is moving towards a time when perhaps that might become a reality.
What might be driving this? Is Russia sort of trying to edge him out?
I think it is, frankly. I mean, there's an awful lot of discussion about that both here and in Minsk at the moment. And of course, these comments came after Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, visited Minsk. He was there yesterday. And he talked about how President Putin has been stressing repeatedly that Russia would like to see constitutional reform in Belarus, that they want calm in Belarus, they want a stable country on its borders, and that they hope that constitutional reform would contribute towards that end. So I think, Russia's looking at the ongoing protests in Belarus with some concern. I think it's looking at the figure of Alexander Lukashenko with some concern as perhaps not a viable force for the future. And it has been doing an awful lot of feeling its way into what might be a way forward out of these protests, these ongoing, persistent, huge protests in Belarus against Mr. Lukashenko. So I think, yes, certainly the message from Russia to Minsk yesterday was it's time to find a way forward. And I think Moscow certainly is looking for someone that they feel they can work with and some way towards that possible scenario. So it's a very complicated and long game, I think, that Moscow is playing. But certainly Alexander Lukashenko seemed to be hinting to Moscow that he'd heard the message and that perhaps he might be ready at some point in the future to move towards that situation.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. That was Sarah Rainsford, our Moscow correspondent, joining us live. Now, the National Health Service in England is piloting a new blood test which is claimed can detect more than 50 types of cancer at an early stage. It's been developed by the Californian firm Grail, and 140,000 people over the age of 50 will take part in the trial. Professor Peter Johnson's National Clinical Director for Cancer at NHS England. First of all, how does the test work?
We know that when cancers start to develop, at an early stage, there are chemical changes in the DNA, in the genetic material within the cancer cells. And these fragments of DNA can come out of cancer cells and go around in the circulation. And what this test does is picks up those chemical changes in the DNA, which are the hallmarks of early cancer development. And this is interesting for two reasons. Firstly, because it may be possible to pick up cancers before they've caused any symptoms. And secondly, because the signal that you get tells you not just that there may be a cancer developing somewhere, but it also gives you an indication where in the body the cancer might be developing, because the patterns of chemical alteration in the DNA are relatively specific to the different cancer types as they develop. So the signal we get from a pancreas cancer will be different to one we get from a head and neck cancer, for example.
And some cancers are quite difficult to pick up early, is that right?
Yes, we spend a lot of time and trouble to make sure that people know that if they're not right, if they've got symptoms that might be a worry for them, that they should go and see their doctor. But there are many cancers which develop quite a long way before they produce any symptoms at all. And we would really like to make inroads into finding those at an earlier stage. We know that cancer screening is a very effective way of improving cure rates for things like bowel cancer or cervical cancer. And we'd really like to extend that to a lot of these other cancers, such as pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, and so forth, where we've really struggled to make an impact and to find good ways of testing for them at an early stage up to now.
And how accurate is the test? I mean, has it been tested already elsewhere, or we in England, the guinea pigs, if you like?
In a way, this is the exciting thing. This is the first place in the world that we're going to be able to get this evidence about how well this test works in people without symptoms. And so the NHS is the first place that this company has come to. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask 140,000 people to give us blood samples each year for 3 years. And for half of those, we will feed the results back. And if they're positive, then we'll investigate to see if there's a cancer somewhere. And for the other half, those will be the control group. And at the end, we'll be able to see whether this blood test really does make a difference to our ability to find cancer earlier and thereby treat it at a stage when it's much more likely to be curable.
And why is it such a large trial? Why are so many people involved?
Well, the good news is that any one of us is not very likely to have cancer at any one particular time. So you need to test a lot of people to find a relatively small number of cancers. And because it's a test for all types of cancer, we want to make sure that we have enough people involved so that we can tell whether it works for many different types of cancer. So this requires a big study across the population. So we think that rolling it out in this way in the NHS to see if it does work is the best way to find the evidence as fast as we can.
And if it does work, is the idea that this would be a routine method of screening everybody at a certain point in their lives?
Yes, if this does what we hope it might do, then the plan would be to start doing blood tests for people every year or two after they pass a certain age when we know the risk of cancer is highest, in order to try and pick that up at an early stage. And of course, we need to be sure that we don't get a lot of what are called false positives, so we don't get positive results when people don't have cancer, because obviously we don't want to cause a lot of worry and anxiety to people. And also we need to see whether the test really is able to pick up cancers at an early enough stage for us to make a difference to the likelihood of cure. So we need to get all that information, and that's what we're going to do.
That was Professor Peter Johnson, National Clinical Director for Cancer at NHS England. Now, wild swimming in the outdoors has become increasingly popular over the last decade or so, and with it there's been a growth in winter swimming in cold water. It is certainly invigorating, I'm told, and may also be good for your health. Last month, new research emerged suggesting that cold water swimming may even slow the onset of dementia. But lockdown here in Britain, for example, means that outdoor pools and ponds are closed, and there are restrictions on swimming elsewhere. So how are these cold water swimmers getting their regular chills? We asked our correspondent, Justin Rowlatt, himself a winter swimmer, to find out.
Kate, morning. It is 6:30 a.m, completely dark, and I'm meeting open water swimming enthusiast Kate Rue. It's a strange assignation, isn't it? Out here by a misty pond.
And it feels like we've crept out before almost anyone else is up. So I've just walked down a very dark path, all the houses kind of quiet.
It feels slightly illicit as well, doesn't it?
I was thinking exactly that. It feels like we've won something already.
How on earth do we get into these ponds? Because they're quite steep-sided.
We go down here and there's a nice little jetty.
What temperature do you think the water is now?
I am not sure, but I would guess it's about 9.
Let's go and swim.
Let's go and swim.
So describe what it's like going in?
Lovely.
Oh, there Kate goes. So it is quite cold. We swim as dawn lights the sky.
Oh, it's nice. It's all right, isn't it? It is.
Kate is the founder of the Outdoor Swimming Society, which is, as the name suggests, dedicated to promoting swimming in the open air. Oh, so how was that, Kate?
That was beautiful. I wish we'd stayed in slightly longer, actually.
Yeah, we could have stayed in longer.
This year, we've just seen an exponential rise in the number of people. You know, there's this huge tribe of swimmers turning up. The other Sunday, a couple of weeks ago, 1,000 people in one day elected to join the Outdoor Swimming Society group because everyone's going. But I mean, I think in this time where everything's so miserable, we're all stoics now, and just practicing this stoic art of getting into water, emerging feeling stronger and clearer. It's nice to find that pinpoint of attention, even if it is on how cold you are.
Listen, I've got to get dressed.
Yeah, you've got to get dressed.
I'm freezing. But in the depths of lockdown, most pools and ponds are closed. So what is this growing tribe of cold water swimmers doing? Some people have come up with very imaginative solutions.
I bought a paddling pool from Argos, then used one of the kids' old ski harnesses and attached that to a bit of elastic that you use for sort of physio exercises. Used a belt and tied myself to a tree and then swam.
So you're tied with a bit of an elastic to a tree in a paddling pool, swimming.
Yep.
For many outdoor swimmers, getting cold has become a compulsion.
When I was told that I couldn't swim, I went into the most incredible panic.
So what have you been doing in lockdown to get your fix?
I have found some places to swim when it's been very, very dark, and I've gone in.
And this is very early in the morning you go?
I've gone very early in the morning, 6:30.
You're climbing over fences, you're a professional, and yet here you are doing this kind of furtive activity in the middle of the night.
If you think about it, it's mad, but the endorphins and the euphoria makes you do it again.
What you're describing sounds like the behaviour of an addict.
I'm openly addicted to cold swimming.
So can you really become addicted to cold?
Hi Justin, my name's Dr Heather Massey, Senior Lecturer at the University of Portsmouth at the Extreme Environments Laboratory. We know so little about the things that affect cold water swimmers and whether that's addictive for those cold swimmers. So it could be that it's related to that physiological response. It could be related to the psychology, the challenge of getting into cold water, or meeting like-minded people who want to also throw themselves into cold water as well.
But do be careful, warns Dr Massey. She says never swim outdoors alone, and remember, the shock of entering cold water can cause heart attacks and strokes. It also prompts a gasp reflex, which can lead to drowning, which is why I'm getting my cold fix in my shower here at home.
Rather him than me. That was Justin Rolat reporting. Just an update on that situation in Iran and its top nuclear scientist. Conflicting reports over what's happened to him. Some news outlets in Iran saying he has been assassinated. Another one says that he's been wounded, has now been treated in hospital. There have also been denials as well. We're keeping across that, and we'll let you know if there are any developments while we're on the air. You're listening to News Hour.
In 10 minutes here on the BBC World Service, our guest on Hard Talk is Ethiopia's Attorney General Gideon Timotheos.
Our forces in the Northern Command were attacked. It was a perfidious and treasonous attack. The Prime Minister and this administration were left with no option but to respond with force.
At bbcworldservice.com, Take 10 looks at the unwanted parcels delivered by Amazon.
I have had a metal flask, a stainless steel flask. I've had a pack of 12 flavoured water drinks. I've had a webcam.
You can also hear BBC World Football.
And I pieced it together that there was this legendary player named Maradona. And I think that just spoke, everything that we need to know about him. He was a legend. Everybody on all corners of the planet knew who he was.
That's at bbcworldservice.com. Now, though, it's back to NewsHour with James Menendez.
A reminder of our top story on the programme today. The Ethiopian Prime Minister has met an African Union delegation seeking to end the conflict in Tigray, but still insisting there can be no foreign interference in what he says is an internal affair. Letitia Bader, Director for the Horn of Africa Region for Human Rights Watch, told us she fears the consequences of an assault on the regional capital, Mekelle.
The warnings coming from the federal government around an imminent attack. I mean, this is a town where there are 500,000 people living. Both sides absolutely need to be taking utmost measures to protect civilians.
Also this hour, the embattled president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, says he won't be in charge once a new constitution is adopted. And the Russian opposition leader, Alexander Navalny, has told the European Parliament the Kremlin won't take EU sanctions seriously while oligarchs' yachts can berth in Monaco and Marseille. This is James Menendez with NewsHour. Thousands of Indian farmers have been staging a protest in the Indian capital Delhi against government reforms which they say favour large multinational corporations and could sharply reduce their income. There have been clashes at various roads into Delhi between them and the police. The authorities are worried in part about COVID spreading in a city that's already been badly hit by the pandemic. The BBC's Nitin Shrivastava is out on the streets. He's been telling me what's been going on.
The farmers have been converging to India's capital, Delhi, and it is surrounded by 4 to 5 states, primarily rural agrarian economies. And these farmers, most of them coming from the northern state of Punjab, Haryana and Western Uttar Pradesh, they are demanding a rollback of the recent laws which the government enacted. And this situation has turned really ugly since yesterday night because there have been more than half a dozen clashes between the police and the farmers. And the police, the administration has not allowed them to enter the capital, Delhi. They say that it is coronavirus pandemic times and it is unsafe for the people, the residents of the city, to have tens and thousands of protesters all of a sudden without any kind of medical screening. So the situation was really ugly this morning. There were repeated clashes, tear gas shells were used, force was used, and water cannons were used.
And what sort of numbers are we talking about? How many farmers are there from what you can gather?
I think the number will not be less than 15 to 20,000. Of course, they're spread into various pockets because there are several roads which lead into Delhi from the other states. They also claim that at least 25,000 farmers are already on their way from their respective homes, and they say that they are ready to spend a week, months, and even a year unless their demands are met, and they appear to be well stocked in terms of supplies.
And just explain their complaint for us. I mean, the government says that their reforms are going to be good for farmers. They'll be able to sell their produce to whoever they want. And I guess they would say that it would make the market for agricultural produce more dynamic. What are the farmers saying?
So the farmers say that they do not believe what the government says. The Indian farming community has been very traditional in terms of dealing with the farming produce. What has happened traditionally is that they go to the government stipulated shops which have fixed prices with their produce and they get cash. Now what's going to happen, because the government says it's planning to liberalize the economy and open up the market, the farmers say they're really apprehensive of the fact that new private players, including the multinationals, may enter the market, and there'll be a point when the private companies who are coming to purchase the produce will determine the prices, and it may not always be to the farmers' liking.
On the coronavirus situation, have you asked the farmers, aren't they worried about that? A, the fact that they're all gathered together, and also this problem of spreading it around, because I mean, India's been hit really hard, hasn't it?
Half of the farmers who are protesting are without masks. Many of them say that, coronavirus is history now. They're more worried about the future of the children, their families. They say that health will only be possible if they have some sort of wealth in the future to maintain their health. And they say that, this has actually affected their lives, their livelihood. So most of them are not really bothered. Some, of course, are, and they are trying to maintain the social distancing and other norms.
That was the BBC's Nitin Shrivastava out on the streets of Delhi. Now, the British-Australian academic Kylie Moore-Gilbert has arrived back home in Australia after more than 2 years in an Iranian prison. The Australian government's refused to confirm that her freedom was secured through a prisoner swap, but media in Iran said 3 of its citizens involved in a 2012 bomb plot were released on Thursday. It's raised hopes for the relatives of other foreign passport holders being held in Iran, most of them dual nationals. Sherry Izadi's engineer husband, Anousheh Ashuri, who has British and Iranian citizenship, is in prison in Iran after he was arrested during a visit to see his elderly mother. That was 3 years ago. I asked her what she felt about Kylie Moore-Gilbert's release.
I was really happy for her release, and I thought, that's at least one family that's being saved more heartache and grief. But at the same time, it's sort of bittersweet because it also brings home the fact that you're still away from your loved ones. Whenever there's a release, it always renews our hope that there may be the same thing in store for us.
Everyone's avoiding the word prisoner swap. Did it look like that to you?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't think of anything other than a prisoner swap because there were 3 people being brought in, greeted by the deputy Iranian foreign minister. And then subsequently, Kylie Moore was put on a flight. And I think the fact that it's not being described as a prisoner swap is because that would confirm that there was hostage taking initially.
And what does that mean for your husband's case? Does it suggest that there has to be some quid pro quo if he's going to come home?
Absolutely. That's what we've been saying for the past several years, that there's always a motive behind the arbitrary detention of all dual nationals, and the Iranian government always wants something in return. And in this case, they're definitely interested in the payment of the IMS debt to Iran, which has been going on for decades now.
This is an old debt, going back to the 70s, I think, isn't it, for money paid by the previous Iranian regime for British defence equipment, and the Iranians say they want it back.
Yes, well, it was money paid, and the contract wasn't fulfilled at the time.
How is your husband at the moment?
He's trying to stay healthy, he's trying to stay positive and trying to avoid being infected with COVID-19, which is pretty rampant in Iran.
And for those not familiar with his case, he was sentenced, last year to 10 years in prison, and the accusation was that he'd been cooperating with, Israel is the hostile government in question. Is there any foundation to them?
There is absolutely categorically no basis to these claims. My husband went to Iran in August 2017 to visit his mother, which he's been doing for many years. But he was arrested on 13th of August, sent to Evin prison, and he has never had any contact, any form of connection to Israel. He was an engineer, so the charges are beyond preposterous, really.
What do you want the British government to do? What can they do?
They should ramp up the actions. Obviously, what they've done so far, which they tell us is negotiations and diplomacy, hasn't worked. Many other governments have succeeded in getting their citizens out of Iran. Obviously, the fact that Iran is trying to use the opportunity of Joe Biden's election to come back to the JCPOA, I think that now is a good time for the European governments to set up maybe some conditions for Iran's acceptance back into the international community. Maybe they should use the opportunity provided by COVID to say to Iran, if you stop the arbitrary detention and arrest of all these innocent dual nationals, then you'll be given certain concessions.
Sherry Izadi. That's it for this edition of the programme. Thanks so much for being with us. I'll be back on Sunday. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.